Last year, she won a national title for gymnastics with her college team. But this year, just days before classes were set to begin, she was shot and killed just a block from campus. For days, her accused killer was nameless until now. We're taking a closer look at the story of 21-year-old Kara Welsh and what we know so far about her case. Kara is from Plainfield, Illinois, about an hour outside of Chicago. But she spent most of her time north of the border in Wisconsin, where she was a standout gymnast at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. Last year, she took home the individual title in vault in the NCAA Division III championships. And Kara was gearing up for another year at Whitewater, set to begin her senior year there on September 3rd, studying management in the College of Business and Economics. But just days before classes began, tragedy struck when Whitewater police responded to a shots fired call. It was just before midnight on Friday, August 30th, when Kara was shot multiple times. It happened in an apartment just one block from the main part of campus. A 23-year-old suspect was taken into custody, but for the entire Labor Day weekend, his name was kept out of the media. It wasn't until Tuesday, September 3rd, the same day Kara was set to begin her senior year, when we first learned the suspect's name: Chad Richards. According to reports, Richards was also an athlete who, as recently as 2022, was part of the UW-Whitewater wrestling team. Authorities haven't revealed how Richards is connected to Kara, but they do say some sort of argument erupted before the shooting and that Kara was shot multiple times. With many questions still about the case, I turned to retired police commander and host of the Profiling Evil podcast, Mike King. So to me, the first thing I think of when I'm hearing the details of this story is the location. This is in Whitewater, Wisconsin, southern Wisconsin. I'm actually from Wisconsin, so I know it's very safe. At least this area is. And campus, too, is usually a pretty safe area. Whenever you're on a school campus, I like to think at least that I'm safe. And this is nearby a campus, right down the road. So I don't know. What are you feeling about those things? The fact that we should be safe right on campus, but then something so tragic happened nearby.
I think this is a perfect example of how we can be sucked into this kind of belief system that our areas are always safe, and it doesn't reduce our responsibility to be risk aware of everything that we're involved in. In this particular case, though, I think it's so darn interesting because it is. I mean, this is Americana, rural, beautiful. It's a scenic area. The universities across America have done such a great job in the last 20 years of increasing awareness among the student body population about things like violence and safety and other things, that on the campuses we see, call boxes to and an openness about let's get out and call police if you're uncomfortable walking to your vehicle after you leave class, especially in the evenings or something. But this is stepping outside of the university boundaries and stepping out into the community. And as we look at this case more, and as I study this case, I find myself reflecting more on the fact that this is another example of domestic violence, now turned domestic violence homicide, and the dynamics that occur within relationships. And I wonder if we're doing a good enough job of empowering people, especially young people, about the dynamics of domestic violence and these red flags that should be popping up in the relationship. And again, I have no idea if there were ongoing problems in this relationship, but it clearly looks like Kara Welsh was involved in a relationship with a man who was helping her move in, another student by all accounts, and we're still waiting to hear, but that there must have been some form of violence in that relationship, or at least at that very moment.
And there's still a lot of unanswered questions in this case, which you kind of referred to. But we do know, at least according to Whitewater police, that there was some sort of altercation or argument leading up to this shooting. And you had mentioned potential red flags in domestic violence situations. Do you think there could have been red flags in this instance? And if so, what could those look like?
So, in my experience, there has always been, I think, in most of these cases, precipitating factors that come into play, stressors that are in the relationship or in the personal lives. And I think as we learn more about this young man, and from what I'm reading on social media and yet to be unfolded, if in fact he is truly the suspect in this case, it appears almost that his life was unraveling a little bit, that he might have been having problems with whether he could remain a student athlete, that he might have had fantasy that he was talking about with that included weapons and violence and other kinds of things. So I think we're going to see those as red flags in this case, whether in fact they really prove out or they're the social media ghost stories that are being launched already. It's still yet to be seen. But some kind of conflict happened on that particular night as they're moving Kara into this new apartment. And again, gosh, I mean, just talk about rural Americana. It looks like a beautiful little area and a beautiful little location. Even looking at the little apartment units that she was moving into, the video just looks like everything is just a really nice upper class, nice middle America kind of a feel. But something went goofy, and whether it was something that had been brewing for some time or a conflict that occurred during the move-in process. I think that's yet to be heard, and hopefully we get something from the district attorney, because clearly law enforcement is charging this suspect in the case, a 23-year-old male that she knew, and that's all we really know. They're charging him with intentional homicide, which tells me there had been some fantasy going on and some evidence that suggests that there was some pre-planning for this. It just didn't happen, and the devil didn't make him do it.
Almost right away, the questions became, how could something like this happen here? And why wasn't the suspect's name released before Tuesday? My childhood home is a half hour, 45 minutes from this area, so I know it well. I know a lot of people who went to UW-Whitewater, and it's something that definitely strikes me. So it's kind of a difficult one. And I know a lot of people in Wisconsin and across the country are wanting answers. So this happened on a Friday night going into a long weekend. We don't know the suspect's name initially because, and correct me if I'm wrong, because official charges haven't been pressed. And I'm wondering if this is because we're going into a 3-day weekend when this person is taken into custody, and probably the DA isn't going to be back until Tuesday to then file the charges. What do you think?
Yeah, and it's interesting because it speaks more to the kind of behavior or the personality of the local law enforcement in the area too, that they're protecting the identity, especially if this is another student and someone who is an intimate friend to Kara. But usually you will see law enforcement say, we've arrested so and so on suspicion of homicide. You'll see a booking photo released. Even going to the jail records, I couldn't see anything with the name that's being floated about as the potential suspect on the jail docket. So was he booked and now has been bailed out, awaiting that arraignment, and that's why we're not seeing the booking? Or are they just really tight-lipped about things like that? Again, I mean, if this was a juvenile, I could understand the secrecy around keeping his name out of the press as a person of interest or someone we've arrested. But here you have a 23-year-old male who somehow is staying under the radar while they go through this. And frankly, wouldn't it be nice if all of these cases were done this way to protect people who might be wrongly charged in some of these cases?
It's interesting because I have worked in local news, even in Wisconsin, and kind of going to what you're saying, I have reported on when somebody hasn't been charged, but they've just been taken into custody. We know their name and age. And in this instance, I thought, oh, this guy must be under 18. That's why we aren't seeing his name. But as you pointed out, he's 23 years old. So what do you think may be a reason why they're kind of keeping his name under wraps, at least for the long weekend?
Yeah, I don't know, Sierra, because to me, I'm as confused as you are about doing that. Other than it speaks to maybe the personality of the Whitewater Police Department, the local sheriff's office, that maybe even in concert with a discussion with the district attorney, they made an open decision that we're not going to release that until formal charges are filed. And even now, as we wait for those charges to be filed, we end up speculating, which I don't know if speculation is healthy for a community either.
Tuesday morning, Chad Richards' name was finally made public when he was officially charged in Walworth County, Wisconsin. He now faces charges of endangering safety by the use of a dangerous weapon, disorderly conduct while armed, and the most severe, first-degree intentional homicide. First-degree homicide, which right away includes premeditation. What would it take for investigators to determine that this guy was premeditated in the crime?
Premeditation is really a tough one because it can be something that occurs moments before. And when I used to teach profiling classes, I would teach about the fact that things are first created. If for those people who are religious, things are kind of created spiritually or in the mind through fantasy or other things. So we see this spiritual or emotional or mental notation that says, I could do this and I would feel comfortable doing this, which you and I might just kind of find so repulsive. That speaks to premeditation. But then you have other kinds of things that are more collateral and circumstantial, like bringing a weapon to the scene, maybe writing a note in social media, fantasizing about taking the life of someone. So you have this process that says that emotionally or spiritually or intellectually, someone has to make a decision that this is something that I would step over the line and do. And then you have the actual physical action of doing that, acting it out, pulling the trigger, uh, extracting a knife and stabbing someone. Those kinds of things become a more overt way of saying, here's the premeditation and now the act itself. So premeditation can get kind of tricky. You can think about it in a bunch of different ways, but you have to first have that mental decision that it's okay, I'm going to do this, and then act it out, backed up, in my opinion, to make it a strong case with physical action that says, hey, I'm going to load my gun. I'm going to take it to the scene with me. I'm going to pull it out in a heat of anger, and I'm going to execute someone.
Another one of the charges we're looking at is disorderly conduct while armed. To me, this one I haven't seen super a lot in my coverage. I see a lot of first degree, second degree, intentional homicide, all of those sorts of things. But disorderly conduct while armed is one I'm not super familiar with. Why do you think that this one may be included?
So disorderly conduct's an interesting thing. It's one of those cases that says someone is acting out in a way that causes alarm to other people, creates concern. It could be that after the homicide, he was walking around in the apartment complex with the weapon still, acting in a threatening manner, or when police arrived, that he was even walking with the gun. In some cases, I wonder if these people hope there's a suicide by cop by still carrying a weapon. But each of those are disorderly in effect. And I haven't looked at that statute in the state of Wisconsin to really dissect it and understand it. But again, I think it speaks more to the action after the event, or perhaps coming up the stairs, walked out to his car, grabbed the gun, scared some neighbors as he was walking up the stairs to go up and commit this homicide. And that is the disorderly conduct. So I think what we're going to see is this separate event that says he was displaying a weapon in a manner that was threatening and disruptive to the community. And that's the purpose for the call. It could be that it's after the fact, and that it was as police are arriving, he's still carrying the weapon or still threatening or creating a disturbance as a result of having that weapon in his possession or within reach.
Investigators haven't completely revealed what led up to the deadly shooting, but there is one disturbing detail that we do know. It's really a senseless tragedy. I mean, we have this young 21-year-old woman. She's going into her senior year of college. She's a college student athlete. I mean, she has her whole life ahead of her, and it's tragically cut short. I mean, kids are going back to school at UW-Whitewater literally today, on Tuesday after the long weekend. So they're going to school without one of their classmates there. So there's still really a lot of questions in this case, things that we don't really know. But one of the things we do know for sure is that she sustained multiple gunshot wounds. So that kind of gets me thinking. I mean, if it was one gunshot wound, I know this sometimes happens in a burglary or robbery situation where it's one or a stabbing, but the fact that there were multiple, does that mean anything to you?
Well, you want to know where those shots occurred. What were the locations of the actual rounds hitting this young woman? Were they in the face area or in the chest? Were they in something that would indicate a more personal nature of an attack versus if he comes back and says, "Hey, it was self-defense. She surprised me, walked around a corner, and I thought it was a burglar, and I just shot to center mass to try to stop this threat." So each of these things are going to become really important and probably become the details in the trial, that if there is a trial, that become really fought over by experts regarding what was the motivation, why was this happening in this way. In most cases, people that go and learn how to shoot a weapon for self-defense are taught to shoot a couple of times before assessing and making sure that threat is stopped. So if you think about, if you've ever gone through that kind of training, law enforcement, you go through, you take a couple of shots and then you reassess and evaluate. And it might have been just muscle movement reaction from training. It could have been fantasy, or it could have been very personal and very significant in regards to why and where those shots were fired.
Kara's story is unfortunately one we've heard before. And speaking with Mike, an important theme came up. You are not alone, and there is help.
To me, the most important message that comes out of this is, here we are again looking at another, in what my opinion is, based on what we know today, based on media reports that are out there, that this is another example of domestic violence, now turned domestic violence homicide. That these problems of domestic violence do not get better on their own. And there's this mindset that we have, especially the mindset of those who are victimized by domestic violence, that somehow they can fix someone or change them or change the situation. In other cases, it boils down to someone who's being victimized in a domestic violence situation not wanting to go forward and say, I was wrong. I really picked a loser this time. And they don't want to admit to their friends or their family or others who may have seen red flags that there were things that I should have picked up on and that I didn't. So there's responsibility on us as people who become victimized. There are responsibilities on those who are predators and become the one who commits the crime. But the real thing to me that's coming out of all of this, Sierra, and that I hope that we somehow get across when we share these kinds of news stories, is that the problem still exists. It's not getting better. We're not doing a good enough job of instructing, especially young people who are starting to enter into relationships. And relationships are complex. I mean, we all have experienced those ups and downs. And we need to do a better job of helping people understand, when there is domestic violence, it needs to be resolved with professional help. And in most cases, in my opinion, it can't be fixed without professional help. And even with professional help, most times it doesn't seem to fix the predator.
Following news of Kara's death, UW-Whitewater Chancellor Corey King released a statement. It reads in part, quote, "Kara was majoring in management in our College of Business and Economics and was a standout member of the Warhawk gymnastics team, winning an individual national title on the vault in 2023. We know the news of Kara's death is heartbreaking for our close-knit university community. It is a time when we are all called upon to support one another, to process and to grieve." The chancellor also noted that counseling services are available for both students and faculty, and the flags on campus would be flown at half staff on Tuesday to honor Kara's memory. There's also been a GoFundMe page created to honor Kara and provide funds for her family. We'll add that link to the description of this video. Richards appeared for the first time in court on Tuesday, where a judge upheld his $1 million bond, citing the fact that he may be a possible flight risk. He's due back in court on Friday for a preliminary hearing. Meanwhile, Kara's death is still under investigation, so anyone with more information should contact the Whitewater Police Department. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Kara Gillespie.